So I'm going to talk to you today about buying a home over 60. Now the rules definitely changed, and I'm going to tell you all the inside secrets, the scoop. What you're not going to find out on ChatGPT or other websites, because I'm going to get into it. I'm going to go deep and I'm explaining to you what has changed, what you really, really need to know. So here we go. What I'm going to do is tell you everything you need to know in order to make your home buying process really, really stress-free. So let's get into it. When I'm working with buyers, it's really, really important to me to make sure that I'm educating them about what's going on in the actual market, like what's happening in the market, what's going on, what are things that we should be looking out for, and that's why you need somebody who's super experienced. The other thing I hear from buyers, particularly over 60, often say there are no homes that meet their criteria. And when I'm hearing that, really what I'm hearing is that their price point is too low, or your criteria is too much for that price point. And so if you're not finding homes that work for you in your price point, it means what you want costs more than your expectations. And the other issue is taking advantage of an opportunity that a house presents. And what I mean is acting quickly, especially if the market is a busy market where you're living. Agents who are experienced understand the market at a really, really high level. So I'm going to tell you a story about a buyer that I had a couple weeks ago. I knew that the house that they were interested in, that they wanted to make an offer on, was going to be in very high demand. And when we went in, we knew that it was going to be in multiple offers, even before we wrote the offer. I thought the house price was really competitive and even actually a bit low, and we knew that it was going to be in multiple offers, as I say. So I had a lot of conversations with these buyers about how to actually get that house for them without just writing an offer that's really super high. And we came up with an idea that had to be very very, very strong offer. And they needed financing, this couple. And to win in multiple offers with any condition, you basically have to pay the seller more for them to consider your offer. So think of it this way. If you have two offers in front of you, one with no conditions and a lower money, or one with one or two conditions and the same offer price, which do you choose? Of course, the one with no conditions, right? So this means you have a firm offer when it gets accepted. No waiting around to find out if the conditions will be fulfilled. To get that seller to accept an offer with conditions when it's in multiple offers, the buyer needs to pay the seller more money to make it worth their while to wait for the conditions to be fulfilled. That's really important to understand. And I look at other comparable properties, what they've sold for. And the best way I've found to compare properties that have sold over list price is not by looking at the amount of money that is spent over. The numbers get too big for people to grasp and understand the differences. I look at percentages over list. I find this is more accurate and easier for people to grasp. So for instance, if it sold 45,000 over list versus 1% over list, smaller numbers are easier to understand and comprehend. And the other thing is I have to look at how many showings there are happening. From this, I can gauge the level of interest in the house. If there are 8 showings versus 20 showings, that tells me I can expect one offer from the 8 showings and likely 3 to 4 offers from those 20 showings. And I want to go through and talk about some of the other things that you can avoid when you're buying. Some things you probably have never even heard of before, just because the industry is so sticky, meaning it's bouncing around and can change really quickly. And if you don't know what you're doing as an educated buyer, which is what I talk about all the time, is educating you, you could be putting yourself in a bad situation. And a lot of times buyers and sellers are thinking that their agent is supposed to be the be all end all. And my goal, my mission in what I'm doing is to make sure that you are educated enough so that you know the questions to ask those agents. And because our industry does have its fair share of many agents who aren't very experienced or don't really treat it like a business, I hate to say it, but there is a very low barrier to entry in this industry. And many agents market themselves and say, oh, I'm such a great agent. Look at how I open these doors. I've got a great Instagram following, these catchy videos with music and dancing, and I look so great. I'm wearing all the great clothes and everything like that. Well, they do a great job marketing themselves, but they don't necessarily mean that they're great agents. And that's really something I want you to dig into with and truly understand. So we're going to get into this, and I'm going to go through all the things. The real estate market has probably changed since you last bought, and there are so many things that you really, really need to know. So I just want to give you the ideas here so that you can be educated, and then you can make sure that you're asking the right questions. Because I've seen buyers lose out on houses. I've seen them overpay way too much. And the biggest issue I see buyers is not getting the house that they want, which is so disappointing. So going into this, you're not going to learn everything. You're not going to know absolutely everything, but I want you to know the questions to ask. That's really important. There's a lot that goes into buying a house right now. And I get a lot of people who are like, oh, well, we're just going to write an offer. I just had this conversation earlier this week. No, have you been pre-approved, or do you have proof of funds? No. So you got to have your timing down. You have to really, really be a good buyer. And a lot of times as a listing agent, I'll get people who say to me, oh, I'm ready to buy a house. And I'm like, okay, great. Do you have an agent? And they're like, no. And I'm like, well, listen, if you don't have an agent, it means you're not serious. You don't really know what you're doing. And a real buyer now, and somebody who is actually ready to pull the trigger and buy, this means that they've gone through the buyer paperwork. It means that they've engaged an agent. It means they've spent time understanding what's happening in the market today. That's what constitutes a really great buyer. And so somebody who doesn't have all these things ahead of time is not going to look like a real buyer. And you need to have clarity as to what you really want or need in your next home. This is crucial. I had a couple downsizing recently, and they were moving from their large 5-bedroom family home. And they needed to understand what they needed. Originally, they thought that they could move into a condo or a bungalow, and they realized that they didn't want to use an elevator, and they found the older bungalows, the basement ceilings tended to be too low, and it made it feel really cramped to them after seeing several properties like this. So they had an expectation that they were going to get a property that was all fixed up for their price range. They needed to be educated as to what it was going to cost them. And they needed to get clarity as to what they wanted and what it would cost and what was most important to them. And I had another couple looking for a family home for themselves and their 4 kids. And at first, they said a bedroom in the basement would be fine. And after seeing a few places, they changed it to needing 4 bedrooms above ground. Now, none of their kids or themselves wanted a bedroom in the basement after seeing those basement bedrooms. So that changed everything and the price range they were looking in. You need to get clear on what you want and how much that will cost in the market you're looking in. Now, the market fluctuates. That same house, it may vary in price depending on what's happening with the economy, consumer feelings, how busy the market is. Clarity is really important. Next, there is the issue right now that if you do not have an income, you likely and don't have a job with income coming in, then you're likely not going to get a mortgage. A lot of mortgage rules say that your debt to income ratio should be not over 41%. And there are lots of different ways this can be managed, but that is really an issue. So if you're over 60 and you haven't done this in a long time, maybe you're retired and you don't have that income, you may be thinking, well, we're just going to go and get another mortgage because we got several $100,000 in the bank. We're quite liquid. The bank will give us a mortgage. Well, that actually may not work. And I hate to say this. So you've got to make sure that you're talking to those lenders. Also, you can start with your agent who can definitely lead you to the right people to talk to about that. And next, you should buy before you sell. This is already an important question to answer, and it depends on what the dynamics in the market are in your area. I just had two different clients who both needed to sell and buy. One sold their house first, and the other client bought their house first. So which one do you do? Well, there's a number of things to consider. One client needed to know how much money they had to go and buy, and they were comfortable with the idea that if they need be, they would rent for a year and look for their house during that year of renting. They were willing to put their belongings into storage if needed and basically move twice if need be. And this is where you need an agent who can think through the logistics. We made sure we had a long closing for them when they sold their house, giving them enough time to find a place. And we'd come up with an alternate plan if the right place didn't come along. Now, the other couple were looking to move to a smaller town, and the location was key for them. And they also had a mortgage and spoke with their lender about needing bridge financing, and if they sold their house for less than what we thought it might need to sell for, so that they were planned financially around that. And we had worked out all the logistics up front about buying first and what that might look like financially for them. And they found their house in the town that they were looking for. And we made the necessary plans for them to accommodate a closing on both homes, and the one that they were selling and the one that they purchased. Now, the timing of everything is very stressful and very difficult. And this is what I'm going to tell you first. You need to sit down and go through potential scenarios for your specific situation and do all the what ifs around that scenarios or those scenarios. Planning is critical. Make sure you have an agent who knows the questions to ask and comes up with different scenarios so you aren't caught short, even if you need to do this 12, 18 months or more out. And planning is very important also. Now, the other thing about buying before selling or selling and buying at the same time is that you may have to include a clause with the sale of buyer's property in the contract. And this means you get to offer, your offer is accepted on the house you want to buy with the condition that gives you so much time to get your home sold. So how much time do you get to sell your house? Is your home ready to be put on the market? That's where planning comes into play. If you do this, you need to have your house ready to put on the real estate market within 2 to 3 days, not 1, 2, or 3 weeks or more. The other party doesn't want to wait around to get your house ready for sale. They want it on the market pronto. And that's where a good agent will have answers up front as to when the staging and photos and everything else are being done. And they've done the necessary comparable work up front, not after they have a signed contract. The sellers of the house you want to buy may not know anything about your neighborhood or your house. So it's up to the agent to really relieve their concerns and answer their questions. Now, what happens if another offer for the house you want to buy comes in? How does that work? There are lots of questions that need to be answered up front, even before you go looking for houses. And you really need to understand the market and how to stick handle the best scenario for you. Remember, I had two different clients, each with a house to sell, and they had two different approaches to how to do that. And both worked, but it took planning and knowledge as to how to negotiate the situation. So I want you to have someone who can help you navigate the best scenario for you. And if you need to find short-term rental, for instance, like that may be the most ideal thing for you. Now, the issue with that, of course, is that you have to spend money on moving 2 times and storage. But these are all the things that you need to take into consideration. So make sure that your agent is your partner. They're someone who is going to battle for you, who's fighting for you, who's not afraid to have the tough conversations. And a couple last points I want to make for you, I think are really important that you need to know about. One of the things I want you to really understand is how to price a home. Now, I know what you're saying. This video is about buying a home, not selling a home, but you need to understand what's happening in the market. And especially since it's so sticky and can bounce around, within types of properties like condos versus detached homes, or by neighborhoods, or the overall economy and market dynamics. So I know you're like, we're not selling, we're buying. But I want you to understand how to price a home. Understand how fast the properties you are looking at are selling. Are they selling within days, or is it more like a couple of months? And that makes a huge difference in how much time you have to react and plan. When you see a property that you're interested in, can you go in a lot below list price, or is the expectation closer to list price or even higher than list price? See, these are the things you need to get a grasp on. This is where a good agent who understands and is actively working in the market can help educate you. If it helps you to know that if that property you're interested in is overpriced, or is it underpriced, or perhaps it's priced just right for the market conditions. By understanding what goes into pricing a home, you're better at knowing what kind of purchase price you need to offer and how quickly it's likely to sell. Is the segment of homes that you're wanting to buy moving quickly? Then it's likely to have multiple offers. Or maybe those types of homes are taking longer to sell, and the list price reflects the amount of interest in the market. Makes sense, right? And it always comes down to a house is worth as much as a buyer is willing to pay, not what the seller needs or wants. So you need to know where things are falling and how quickly homes are selling. And you also need to understand that the market you're selling in, I want to make sure that you go with somebody who has enough experience, who knows what they're doing, and is a full-time professional. Full-time is a non-negotiable. And then also just talking about when is the best time to buy. Well, the best time to buy really is when you're ready to buy. Now, usually there are homes that come on in the spring because people want to close before summer and before school happens. That's the traditional thinking. Spring is the busiest market, and it may not be the case in your area. Sometimes the best times to buy are actually in the wintertime. And because not as many people are purchasing and you have less competition and still have choice. And the other thing is house prices may drop a bit during these periods, which is great as a buyer. So the real estate market never stops. So don't get caught up in thinking that there's a better time to buy versus another time. It's when you're ready to buy. So then really the last thing is that this is really an emotional process. This can be very difficult, buying and selling a home, but it doesn't have to be. The more education that you give yourself, the more that you learn and ask your questions, the better you're at understanding the process. And when you understand the process, you're more likely to have less stress. And that's the whole point, is to try and reduce your stress levels so that you have a great experience with buying. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.